Hello there, everyone. It's Kristi, and I'm here with Jody from her channel. Jody, it's Sinead, right?
Yeah, Jody Sinead.
Yeah, it's those Irish spellings that always make me hesitate. I like
Hello,
Siobhan
everyone.
as well.
It's Kristi,
Oh, and of
and I'm
course I
here
did the
with
damn
Jody
thing
from her
where
channel.
I put the thing on. Dang it. I'm adding this new skill to my Hangout repertoire. I mean, I'm trying to expand, but I can do it one time during a Hangout, and I still get caught. Second time I got caught out on that. I want to thank you, Jody, for coming on the channel to have this chat because, and I'll give my reasons for wanting to have this talk, and then we can talk a little bit about the Harvey Weinstein scandal and whatnot. So I was pretty deep in the Mythicist Milwaukee lead up and then the consequences to it, and the story about Harvey Weinstein kind of like I was aware of it vaguely because I was on Twitter and I was seeing people tweet about it, but I hadn't really had a chance actually until today as preparation for this hangout to get really deep into the story. And I've been watching videos on it for about the last hour, so I feel like I've got a pretty good grasp of it. And even I have to say I'm shocked at the scope. As I dug into this and looked at the various interviews and even the research behind it and how NBC basically refused to air it, and that whole second storyline that goes along with it. But as I was watching it happen, I was getting very frustrated because people were describing a institutional rape culture at the corporation or the company. I think it's a private company and a corporation. But nobody was saying the words rape culture. And I think it's important that we call this what it is, because it's important for us to understand and name the thing that supported him. So I wanted to have this hangout to kind of bring up this topic yet again and put it out there, and maybe get some people also calling this what it is. Now, before we start, I put a definition of rape culture into the description box. And I have to say that as a political scientist, one of the theories that we have available to us is institutional theory, because political scientists oftentimes study governments, and governments are collections of people, but it's not just a collection of people. There are practices, there are rules, there are norms, there are procedures, and these are created by people, in the top of the institution and then carried out by people underneath it. And so when you look at what an institutional norm is or a practice, you can see cause and effects of how some issues are taken up and others aren't, or how some procedures work in different scenarios given, what party runs it or whatever. And I understand that when we talk about rape culture, quite often it's applied to a society at large, and that might lead to some level of confusion equating the society with rape. And I think rape culture is actually a really interesting and useful conceptual analytical tool of analysis when it comes to institutions. And so when I talk about rape culture, I'm very much influenced by this institutional theory approach from political science that I don't know is explicitly tied to rape culture when talked about more generally. But for me, the Catholic Church, the practices that led to decades of predatory priests being moved from not parish to parish, but from church to church, while the institutions, the people in the institution of the Catholic Church behind those predators covered up for them, didn't expose it, didn't do anything. They basically enabled and protected the predators.
Yeah.
Fox News earlier this year, with Roger Ailes and Bill O'Reilly, and I think is his name Eric Bolling too, was sending dick pics to people on staff or whatever at Fox News. There was a culture there where you couldn't go to HR because HR would just report to the top boss, who was the person who was responsible for the behavior. And people around him protected him, and they knew about this, and they let it continue. And this is what we're seeing again with the Harvey Weinstein case. This isn't just about one guy being a predator. It's about non-disclosure agreements and huge sums of money being paid to women so that they wouldn't talk about what happened so that he could continue to do it. Talking about stories being passed around, jokes being made on award shows. I mean, it was I get that probably people who weren't targeted, like men that he didn't masturbate in front of, and actresses that he didn't find attractive, would not have seen this side of him. That doesn't surprise me. But what has been really shocking with now 30 women coming forward, 3 accusing him of rape, is that this is what a rape culture looks like in practice. When an institution is set up to protect somebody in power, and in this case, somebody who was perceived as being so powerful that, from the looks of it, even news organizations like NBC were not willing to run with really well-documented stories, accounts, and investigative, sort of journalism in order to corroborate things. They weren't willing to go up against this guy, and so that is, and that is why for decades he was able to do this, and that is a rape culture. Like, in that company, that's a culture that enables him to continue to be a predator. So why aren't we calling it what it is? And that's the question I want to kick over to you and also get your perspective on. It's a huge question, Jody. It's a small question of why aren't we calling this a rape culture? It's more rhetorical in some ways. So I don't feel like I'm putting you on the spot. But I don't know if you understand my frustration. You can relate to it or whatever. But that was me having a bit of a rant.
No, it's all good. Yeah, I like completely agree with you that like this is the definition of a rape culture. Like you said, it's protecting the powerful people because like they're good for business, and just because they happen to do a few naughty things every now and again, it's fine as long as no one knows about it, no one talks about it. But that's just so wrong. Like the institution shouldn't be set up like that. It should be, you can complain to someone, you can go to HR, you can go to a newspaper or somewhere and be believed. But that's not the case. So many women, not just this Harvey Weinstein situation, but other people in power, not even just celebrities, but like bosses and employees and stuff, in all sorts of situations, this happens, and people will go to HR and nothing will happen to the accused, but they might be shunned from the company, or they might be moved to a different department, or they might not get into a film, or whatever it is. And it's just people protecting those in power. And you know why? It's because they bring in money. They're the money makers. They run the businesses and stuff. But there should be some protection for the little people. Like, it doesn't matter if you're some, I don't know, a maid working at a hotel and the owner of the hotel comes onto you, or if you're an aspiring actress and you go to this big like head honcho and he masturbates in front of you. Like, it shouldn't matter at what level it is. It's always, well, mostly protected. And because of this, so many women just stay silent, and that's just wrong, because then it happens again and again and again. And then sometimes, if it's like a big deal like the Harvey Weinstein thing, loads of people come up at the same time, and then you kind of have to believe them because there are so many of them. But it shouldn't get to that point. It should be one accusation and you look into it. And that's what rape culture is. It's not listening to the one accusation. It's passing off that as, oh, they're just overreacting, or, oh, we don't have to bother with that because it's only one little person, or whatever. It's awful. And I'm really glad that these women were able to come forward and talk about what's been going on. And then obviously after the story broke, more women have been able to come forward. And I mean, I was watching an interview earlier, I can't remember who it was, but it was one of the actresses who came forward after the initial reports, who said she'd been holding on to this for like 12 years. And it's just like, it's incredible. And people saying that it was known in the company, another in not the company, in the industry. And this other woman saying that she told people then and there, and they just laughed it off and was like, oh yeah, that's just Harvey. Like, that's rape culture. That's what we mean by you don't get believed and you get laughed at, or it gets brushed aside because that's just who this person is, or oh yeah, that's just what you have to do to get into this industry. Like, that's not what you should do. That's not what should be expected of you. And most of these people, it wasn't that they said no, it's that they felt they couldn't say no because of the power imbalance. And a lot of these situations, be it Harvey Weinstein or a lawyer or some other boss somewhere, it's the power imbalance where you can't say no, or your job prospects will be ruined. So it's either stay silent and let this sexual abuse happen, or come forward and possibly have the rest of your life ruined. Like, it's just incredible. And I don't know why this happens. I don't know why people just won't believe people when they come forward. And it's just sickening, really.
No, I totally get where you're coming from. I think on the issue of, in this particular case, when it comes to the silence around Harvey Weinstein, you definitely get, from hearing the stories of the women that he violated or masturbated in front of, or is that he did have the power. He could put you on a project, he could take you off a project. And because of that, this is part of the way that it sort of institutionally keeps people, coming back to the person who has the ability to give them the career that they want. And so, as you talked about, many of the women, if you listen to women who were the actresses, not everyone that he exposed himself to or tried it on with was an aspiring actress, but they'll say, that they had a nice conversation with him. He invites them over for some kind of business meeting, usually with some sort of assistant that is initially there and present. Sounds like often it was a female employee, which I want to come on to in terms of how the female employee's participation in this speaks actually more evidence of a rape culture at the company. But then the assistant would leave, and then he would try his shenanigans, and they would try to basically avoid doing anything because that's not what they were there for, and they were repulsed, and shocked and humiliated and made incredibly embarrassed and uncomfortable. But at the same time, they couldn't slap his face and walk out because, as you say, that would end their career, at least at his company and maybe elsewhere in the industry. So they would have to try to please him, keep on his good side while he's making these unwanted advances, and dance this dance with him in order to protect their careers, right? And that is just a terrible thing to think about. Being in that position, because of course later when you make accusations, people come out and say, well, if he was so awful, why did I see you at a party talking to him a year later? Well, it's because I had to make my, so it's a way to discredit people, the women in this case, who are making the accusations by saying, well, if he was so bad, why, if he did this to you, why did you keep talking to him? Now, some women didn't. Some women had anything to do with him. And one woman who I listened to in an interview actually left acting the industry after this because she didn't know who to turn to. Who would she call it his company to report him? He owned the company. Who could she, it doesn't seem like the Screen Actors Guild is, I've never heard anyone mention the fact that they should be doing something on behalf of actors to protect them in this case. And I don't know what's going on with that. So that imbalance of power, as you said, I think that explains a lot of this rape culture. It's about power.
Yeah, it's all about power. And because if it was, say, the other way round, say, an actress coming in to talk to a head honcho and the actress comes on to the person, they can easily say, no, stop. And they kind of have to, because else their career will be ruined because they've just like come on to this person higher up than them. It's always the that way round when things aren't done. Um, Obviously, it happens that way round a lot, probably. Uh, but in that situation, the like boss could probably go to HR and complain about it, and because they're higher up, something would probably be done. But when it's the other way around, it's the power imbalance, and they feel like they can do whatever they want and they're protected. And the institutions that they're in make it that way. Like, they do protect them. And so they feel protected, they do it again, they're protected, so they feel protected, they do it again, they're protected once again. Like, it's a vicious cycle. And until like something like this happened where women actually speak up, then nothing's really going to be done.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's come out is the number of women who signed non-disclosure agreements. I think Rose McGowan, if I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, she made the accusation and she was paid $100,000 and agreed to sign a non-disclosure agreement. Now she's I don't know if she's breaking it or reporting a crime or whatever. I guess I'll let legal experts speak about what legal liability she might have in terms of breaking a non-disclosure agreement. But that means that there were lawyers involved. And other people had to know about this. $100,000, unless it's coming out of his private funds, if it's coming out of company money, how did the board not know about that? And these agreements with these that women were signing, and as well, in terms of, like, again, with the power imbalance, one of the things that was part of his pattern was to do this bait and switch. If you read about you should just listen to the women's stories. They'll tell the stories, and you'll see the pattern very easily. If it's with an actress, he normally meets them, sets up some sort of professional meeting. At the very last minute, it's changed to his hotel room. The actress is escorted up with an assistant, or there's an assistant in the room. That person leaves, like I said, and then he starts making his move on them. The question came up, what about these assistants? Didn't they know? They had to know. They had to see this. How many times did they participate in this little charade of baiting her in with a business meeting and then moving her up to the hotel room? And I think Rowan Farrow, who wrote the story for the New Yorker, said that a lot of the employees that he talked to, or some of the employees, said that they carried tremendous amounts of guilt for their participation in this. But of course, if they said anything, who was going to believe them? They would be shut out of the industry.
Exactly. It's kind of like, if they didn't do it, someone else would, so they might as well do it so they can keep their job.
Well, it's more, I think it's more like, yeah, exactly. Like, if they tried to call him out, then yeah, exactly, that someone else could do their job just as well, and then they would get the opportunities that knowing Harvey Weinstein would bring. Yeah. And so because of that, it made, people ended up acting out of self-interest. And that perpetuates like, that is part of the culture of the silence. And also, now, as somebody pointed out, who was actually a victim, but everybody who is involved with this is now, it's his shame when he blocks the doorway and drops his pants while he's staring at you, and he just says, well, just stand there and be quiet. And then he masturbates in front of you, and apparently into a potted plant at some back room of a restaurant, if things, details are to be believed. When that happens, I'm sorry, I kind of got lost in my train of thought because it went to that really horrible, dark place in the account.
Okay.
But the guilt of it, like, that person their dignity is violated. And watching that creepy old man, I mean, seriously, just think about the spiders. Feel like it's so degrading. That person is part of his shame. The employees who didn't speak up or speak out over it are implicit in his shame. The other actors, everybody who knew about this and said, yeah, that's Harvey, or one allegation says Ben Affleck said I told him to stop doing that. This isn't something that there was a whole cone of silence, a whole conspiracy of silence. And this, again, you get back to a culture, right? Because that is an atmosphere that exists in Hollywood and has existed now for decades. And that is something, when you go into Hollywood, you have to navigate. It's rape culture.
I mean, the whole casting couch cliche is a part of that culture. Like, you hear, like, to get into acting, a lot of, like, people, they're aspiring actresses and they go somewhere because they're promised, like, a part, but then they end up, like, going into pornography because they're kind of pushed in that direction because of, like, some sleazy director or whatever, and that's like kind of small scale kind of stuff ish, I think. But yeah, these women, they didn't know what they were getting themselves into, and it's not that they like it's not like they could say no necessarily once they're up there, because they've agreed to the meeting, but the meeting just happened to have changed places. And so it's just a meeting, but then something happens and you don't know how to react. And if someone tells you, like, I can't remember which actress it was, whose interview I was watching earlier, she said that he grabbed her by the back of the neck, forced her in front of the mirror, and started masturbating while watching her. And that is just sickening. Like, you don't expect that to happen when you're going for basically a job interview. And that is so... I can't think of the word right now. All that's coming to mind is like belittling, but I don't know if that's quite the right word.
Yeah, it's like dehumanizing.
Yeah.
He's using women as like a live penthouse magazine.
Yeah. Like, he enjoys the fact that he has the power to tell these women to stand there while he masturbates over them. Like, that's got to be part of his fantasy, because he could easily watch porn or get a magazine or whatever, but he invites these attractive women up to his hotel room and he does stuff that, like, he knows that they can't say no, and he takes full advantage of that. And yeah, he makes it seem safe because it's just a meeting, and then it's a meeting and his assistants are female, so a lot of women will probably feel comfortable thinking, oh, there's going to be another woman there. But as soon as she's gone, you know alarm bells are going to go off. But a couple of them said they didn't want to embarrass him. And just that whole, like, not wanting to embarrass their attacker speaks volumes, because of how he was in Hollywood. You felt like you were doing something wrong, or like you had led him on in some way, when he knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew that he was luring them into a false sense of security and then taking whatever the fuck he wanted.
One of the things that's really disturbing about this is, and I guess in some ways it's good to shine a light on this, was the decision by the New York City Police Department not to go ahead with pressing charges against him related to his audio. A woman that had complained about him to the police went back, or had audio of him the day before he had grabbed her breast and was trying to, if you listen to the tape, you can hear his tactics, the way that he kind of cajoles people and pleads with them and sort of threatens them, don't embarrass me, in front of these people at the hotel. And he has a whole series of psychological tricks that he uses to put the other person in a position where they owe him something, or he is the wronged party, or they should be nice to him. On this tape, in this interaction, he's trying to get her to come into the room, and she's saying, I don't feel comfortable. And at one point she said, yesterday you grabbed my breast. And he said, oh, I'm used to that. I won't do it again. He just admitted sexual assault. Like, it's probably like 4th degree sexual assault, like misdemeanor, grabbing somebody's body in an unwanted way. But it was still the admission of a crime. And they didn't go forward with it at all. It was quashed, and apparently when talking to some of the officers that were working on it, they were very frustrated. But just like with NBC, I watch the Young Turks, so I'll go watch their coverage on this. They describe how Rowan Farrow, who published it eventually with the New Yorker, took it to NBC, and it got put up the ladder, like to the CEO of NBC Universal had to approve of this. And they went back and forth trying to get clearance to publish the story. And there was the tape with Rose McGowan. There was other things that they had the audio tape from the New York Police Department case with him admitting that he had grabbed a woman's breast in an unwanted way. And NBC still didn't run with this. So we can talk about the fact that, this is why the farther I go down this rabbit hole, the more I see the rape culture and the ways that people, because of self-interest related to a very powerful man, were willing to silence victims with prima facie, like pretty credible things that you would, could pursue legally, information and accusations. And the fact that they didn't go forward with this, and the fact that, it's just, it again speaks to how wide this circle of silence around protecting the sexual predator was. And part of it, too, was not just ingratiating, but he has a whole bunch of lawyers, and he's a very powerful person in Hollywood. And so he was able to exercise his control through institutions, use his power, not only within his own company, but across into the media in order to protect himself so that he could continue his predatory behavior.
Yeah. It's I don't even know what to say. Like, it's just ridiculous how far his reach is. Like you said, not just his company. But I didn't actually know about the what was it, NSBC?
NBC is one of the major corporate outlets in the US. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know about that. That shocks me, but it doesn't surprise me, if that makes any sense. It's like, how can you cover something like this up? But at the same time, it happens all the time. So it makes you wonder how many more people out there are doing this. And
I mean, sorry to interrupt, but Emma Thompson called him the tip of a very, I think, ugly or nasty or something as iceberg when it comes to sexual harassment in Hollywood. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just Hollywood. It's like, I know, like, the main thing we're talking about is Hollywood, but like, what was it the other day? The guy from Screen Junkies or something, Defy Media, things were covered up about him, and it wasn't until the media got hold of it that HR did anything. And I'm not like very well read about that story. I've only heard a few things, but from what I understand, this guy used his position of power within his company to he promised people that they would be on some of his videos or something, and took advantage of that. And these women went to HR, gave them information. They didn't pursue it until the media got hold of it. And yeah, it must happen in not only all forms of like entertainment industries, because obviously, like, if you're like an aspiring actress or singer or musician or whatever, it's going to be you try and get as many contacts as possible, and some of those contacts are going to be awful people, and you don't know who those awful people are until it's too late, because they all outwardly seem like okay people, or you think like, oh, they've dealt with so many people, they're professional, and then something like this happens, and you mustn't know who to trust. Like you said earlier, there was that actress who didn't pursue acting anymore or something because she didn't know who to trust in the industry. And yeah, it must be very scary to just not know who you can turn to or who you can trust, because not only is the person doing it, but all the people around him are covering it up. And if I was in that situation and I was hearing about this Harvey Weinstein stuff, I would be in two minds. Either I would come forward about my attacker, no matter who it was, or I would feel like I should be silent. I would not be able to talk about it even more, because if the Harvey Weinstein stuff had been brushed under the rug for like decades, then who would believe one person about this other person? Like, in some ways, the whole Harvey Weinstein thing might open more doors to other victims, but it might also close doors, because they might think, well, he got away with it for so long that if I'm the only one, then no one's going to listen to me.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, believing the victim was an issue, I think, for Angelina Jolie. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I don't know if you want to pop your mic on mute. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Sorry. Yeah, I think it was Angelina Jolie who sent around a Twitter with people said, people are asking why women didn't speak up sooner, and saying this is what the reaction we get when we do speak up. And it was, oh, it couldn't have been that bad. And it was just a whole series of ways that people discount what a woman would say if she came to talk about what had happened to her. And this is, we look at Fox News. Also, you want to mention the entertainment industry, but Fox News had paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars over many different lawsuits because of Bill O'Reilly, because he was actually being protected by Roger Ailes, who himself was a sexual harasser. And yeah, women in that company had to negotiate, navigate, work around that kind of sexually demeaning comments, or even being invited into the office and being told about, oh, we would be good together, and this kind of stuff. It's not what you plan when you go to work and you're trying to be professional, and you have usually an older guy with a lot of power, an overinflated ego, and not really, not an attractive personality, not a person that, and they're using their power to force themselves on you, to find some way of getting off or enjoying themselves at your expense. And when an institution allows that to continue and perpetuates that, then yeah, that coming back to the point, Fox corporate culture includes a rape culture. Definitely.
Yeah. And something that's popped into my mind is not just people within the industry, but a few years ago, in British media, there were accusations about Jimmy Savile, who was a children's TV show host and a radio presenter, and did loads of stuff for charity and things, but he used his position of power to sleep with and sexually abuse children who he worked with, like who he had on his show or who he went to hospital to help. And there was this big thing after he died where all these people were coming forward and saying this is who he was. He wasn't this really lovely guy who did things for charity because he wanted to help people. He did these things for charity so that he could position himself around vulnerable people and do whatever the hell he wanted. So yeah, it's not just people within the industry and feeling like they can't say no so that their careers won't be ruined, but it might be people, just ordinary people who happen to run into these people or interview these people or are being interviewed by these people who might be attacked. And maybe because they're not well-known celebrities, they might not be listened to even more so, because say with Harvey Weinstein and these like actresses who are quite big names now, they came forward. If it was just regular people, I wonder if it would have been such a big story. It's just like, I don't know. Yeah.
And it's also frustrating that it has to be 30 women coming forward.
Yeah.
30 women coming forward for him or for Bill Cosby. And their stories independently over different decades in different situations all have the same kind of creepy patterns to them. And it seems to take a critical mass of victims.
Yeah, it should just
for any one victim, is considered credible.
One person.
Mm-hmm.
And then it be investigated, but it's not. It's one person, I'll brush them away. 5 people, it's still manageable. But like 10 people come forward, it's like, well, I guess we can't ignore this any longer. But only if they're all out at the same time. Like if it's like drip fed through like decades, one person here and there, even if it amounts to like 20 people, it might not be taken seriously. But with like these, what was it originally, 6 people?
Sounds about right.
Coming forward, all those people at the same time, they're kind of taken a bit more seriously because, yeah, it's a group of people, and it's harder to ignore a group of people than it is a single person. And I think that's why it takes so long for some of these stories to come out, because the people, they think they're alone. They think that they're the only people that this has happened to. And that's why so often you see like 5 or 6 people come out about this, and then loads of people come out after this. And I think a lot of people kind of say, oh, they're just jumping on the bandwagon. They want their like 15 minutes of fame and stuff because of all this. But it's like, well, no. I mean, there may be like 1 or 2 people who think that, but the majority of people who come forward after the main story are probably just people who think like, oh, okay, these people are actually being acknowledged and believed. So maybe if I come forward, it's going to strengthen the argument and I can get some closure. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like, people don't believe you if you're one person, but then people might not believe you if there are too many people as well, because they think that you're making it up for attention. And I don't know, that's another part of rape culture, the whole you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't.
Very much so. And the Sorry, like just kind of, I was free associate. I was listening. I had a point, and then I started listening to your point, and then I lost the thread of mine. But to kind of wrap this up, I think because we've gone over it, we've talked a lot about some of the examples in the institutions and how the practices, and that's actually where I wanted to go with this is how do you then solve this problem? What other avenues? Now, HR at the company, if you're an actress who's, looking for a job, that's maybe not a place where you can go. And to me, it brings me back to something I brought up, I think, at the beginning, which is like, where is the actors union in this? I mean, I thought that, there was like the Screen Actors Guild and the Writers Guild, and because occasionally they'll go on strike, so I know that they're willing to do collective action. But if these are people who are coming into Hollywood and joining the union so that they can get paid at, SAG rates or whatever, shouldn't they have a union rep? Shouldn't there be something on the employee side where people can go and make these kinds of reports? And apologies for the motorcycle going down my street. But, you can't, people who are victimized by people at the top in these movie making and movie producing companies, you can't go to those companies and think that they're going to treat you fairly. You need somebody who's supposed to be on your side. And that's, as we go forward, that's the question I would like to know is Hollywood has, I think, only started to unpack this problem. But going forward, how are actresses and actors coming into Hollywood this year, next year, the year after that, if they're put in a situation or they're demeaned in this way, who can they go to? Who will be their representative to the companies?
Well, the obvious thing would be going to, say, Twitter or something and talking about your experience on Twitter, because you're reaching a wide network of people, and people could pick up the story, and you might be shared around and stuff. But then I say that, and Rose McGowan, I don't know her last name. She got banned from Twitter when she was speaking out about it. So even that doesn't seem to be an option, because you don't know if what you're saying will get you banned. And like you said, with the Screenwriters Guild people, I've forgotten the name already. Yeah, you'd think that you could just go to them, but I don't know. It's tricky.
You need an institution to take on an institution, right? You've got a company here that has an active rape culture. It's protecting a predator. It has a financial power and ability. So you can't be an individual. It's not going to be Harvey Weinstein versus each of these individuals. It's going to be the whole company behind him and his team of attorneys and all of the people around him that he's put on a good face to, that the people around Hollywood he doesn't take his pants down in front of, who think the world of him. All of that protects him. So yeah, it can't be one person. It has to be, you need to meet institutional power with institutional power, some kind of collective group and voice, and also to evaluate the claims. I'm not going to say every single claim that comes through is going to be legitimate. All right. You also would need someone who, with an investigation team or people who would investigate the stuff and take it forward, interview people or whatever else, and try to do, because you don't want to, if they're prosecuting false claims, it makes the whole problem, it makes the credibility harder for the next person comes along. So I'm not saying that in all claims that it can't be followed through on are false. I mean, there's, when you get into he said, she said, or he said, or she said, she said, or they said, there's a range of circumstantial evidence that you can do to corroborate these kinds of things, So I think we all know that more sexual crimes happen than are ever even, reported, let alone prosecuted.
Definitely.
And that's the nature of the problem. So, yeah, I think having some kind of institutional protection for actors, it can't just be individuals. It has to be part of the solution going forward.
And you'd think maybe going to the police is that solution, but like we saw with the Harvey Weinstein stuff, they didn't seem to take things seriously, even with that evidence of him admitting that he groped this woman. So if you can't trust the police to do that, who can you trust really? Like, maybe there should be like a sexual abuse society of people who you can go to with your claim and they'll take it seriously. But then who's going to set that up and who's going to run it and how
Well,
are they
that's
going
why,
to
yeah,
vet
that's why
stuff?
I would tie it to union representation, because
Mm,
you're a worker. That's a workplace environment. You should have
exactly.
protections in the workplace. That's just so even, what I think, you could go join the union if it happened. I mean, but I think that's it. It also needs to be placed centralized because some of the things happened at abroad, some of them happened in Hollywood, some of them happened in New York. You can't see the pattern for a
Mm,
guy who flies around the world or has access to mobility when you're filing in different police reports, right? That takes that whole string of 20 or 30 victims over a few decades, and it not only distances them by time, but it also distances them by geography. You're not actually seeing the pattern
yeah, because
because you're not, yeah.
I was going to say it's different. Like if you're in an office building and the boss comes on to an employee, um, they might say something to their HR department, even if it's not dealt with that one person. If more people come forward about this one guy, then they're going to maybe be taken more seriously because they're all in like the same file. But yeah, with him jetting all over the world and seeing different people at different times, and maybe um, the meetings that were set up probably weren't like written in a diary or anything, so you can't even like corroborate that with his schedule, maybe. So it is really tough to figure out because there's no centralized place that you can go to that um, can kind of document all this stuff because, like you said, it's different times, different places, and yeah, it's not like all in one building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so going forward, I think that I would at least, if there are more people who are culpable of that, whoever they are, whoever their victims are, I think that it's time to kick more rocks over in Hollywood, in the entertainment industry, and I think in corporate culture and in other parts. The rape culture, we're sort of focusing on industry here, but it definitely happens within education and higher education. We know about various sports teams and accusations of gang rape or sexual assault. There was the case in Texas of a high school where for several years there was an ongoing hazing ritual where boys would sodomize boys coming into the team, the basketball team, and this was known to the adults, and they just considered it, you know, boys being boys, and they protect. This became a federal lawsuit. I covered it on one of my other shows that I haven't had time to do in ages, but so rape cultures, these practices of people knowing about things and not speaking up, victims being told to shut up or marginalized through social pressure, peer pressure, if it's got enough, if the person involved has enough money through, buying them off, buying their silence and non-disclosure agreements. The title of the hangout is a take on Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus, but it's directed at Armored Skeptic, Greg, because one of the first things I saw by Garrett was his response to Armored Skeptic. And in that, he says, nobody's denying that rape happens. What we're denying is that there's anything like a rape culture. Nobody denies racists don't exist. We just don't think there's institutional racism. I don't know how you could look at these examples of multiple people organizing in order to keep a sexual predator active. I mean, that's really what we're talking about, whether it's the Catholic Church or Fox News or Harvey Weinstein. In some cases, the people who enabled Bill Cosby, although I don't want to speak to that because that's something I know less about, but institutions especially. You can't, I don't know what else you would call these practices and cultures and customs and rules, because if you look at, again, institutional theory, institutionalism in political science, that's what the form of analysis is. And this is a culture, a corporate culture that includes sexual assault and
Mm,
harassment and potentially rape.
Yeah. If you
So
don't call it rape culture, it's at least institutionalized rape, because, like you said, it's in every single institution that you could possibly think of. Like like you said, the Catholic Church, where the vicars are moved from like place to place because there are accusations for them. There in schools there are like cases of people, like teachers, doing stuff to kids. I know that someone uh, that I know, um, their old school teacher was like outed as being a paedophile, and they weren't surprised at all. Apparently, he had the nickname something like Pervy, whatever his name was, um, and like that was known about. Maybe not to the degree that the uh, the media had reported it, but it was known that he was a perv, and yeah, it's people all in all institutions, and they're just kind of covering it up and not taking it seriously. And then we, as like consumers, we don't take it seriously because, well, I know I take it seriously, but a lot of people don't take it seriously because it's like, oh, it's just one off. But it's so many one offs that it's not a one off.
yeah, yeah, it's a sexual predator.
Mm,
That's what you're talking about.
yeah,
So, right. Well, I kind of have run out of things that I want to. I didn't think this was going to go for like 2 hours. I thought it
yeah,
would maybe go for about an hour. But I just wanted to, yeah, thank you for having this discussion with me because, again, as I said, I feel like everyone is talking around the issue.
yeah.
And talking around what it is, but not actually calling it what it is. And I think it's important to assign this label where it obviously, based on observation, fits. This ticks this ticks the boxes. And I think it also is helpful for people, instead of thinking about entire societies as a, like the whole American society or British society as a rape culture. I think if you start with institutions like this and you start to see the patterns and the connections, how power is used, how the rules of the institutions are tilted in the favor of the sexual predator, not towards the victim, the
Yeah.
silence, all of this, you're like, oh wow, you're right. This isn't just one guy who's pervy or one guy who's a bad person. There's like a whole bunch of things that let him continue to do this for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's what rape culture is.
Yeah, yeah.
Plain and simple.
So yes, Greg, there really is a rape culture. All right. Well, and then on that bombshell,
Yeah.
is there anything else that you wanted to discuss that we haven't had a chance to?
Um, no, I probably could come up with like a million more things if I thought about it, but I think we've talked about the main points, I think.
I think so as well.
Yeah.
There are a ton of videos. I can actually put up more. Like I said, I watched about an hour's worth of content just covering this story across. I would encourage those of you who have been watching this to go ahead and watch those links. Some of them are from the victim, some of them are in reaction. Seth Meyers, I have to say, Samantha Bee did a great piece. The thing, of course, about comedy is that it ends up kind of taking the edge off of what I think is a really horrible story. But Seth Meyers did a great piece, and I will make a point of linking that below in the description box as well. So go and listen to the people's stories. Go watch some of the coverage that I've provided. It's just truly, for me, like overwhelming in terms of how the scope of the story, how many people it touches, how many people were involved with protecting this guy, and yeah, I think that's why I wanted to talk about it. So thank you, Jody, for talking about it with me and for your thoughtful comments and contributions.
It's always a pleasure to be on a hangout with you. I've loved it.
Good, I'm glad. All right, for those of you who've watched all the way to the end of the hangout, thank you so much for your time and attention. I've been Kristi. You've been awesome. And from Jody and me, goodbye. Say goodbye, Jody.
Bye.
Bye.